This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Bohemian San Francisco, The Elegant Art of Dining by Clarence Edwords. Section 7. In the Heart of Italy. What a relief it is sometimes to have a good waiter say, "You do not know what you want. Will you let me bring you the best there is in the house?" Sometimes, you really do not know what you want, and usually when that is the case, you are not very hungry. That is always a good time to try new things. It is also possible that you do not know what you want because you do not know how to order. In either instance, our advice is, if the waiter gets confidential and offers his assistance, you will certainly miss something if you do not accept his good offices. This was the case with us one day when we were over at 1549 Stockton Street, near Washington Square, at the Zanduia. The proper pronunciation of this is as if it were spelled Zhanduya. This is one of the good Italian restaurants of the Latin Quarter. At the Zanduia you get the two prime essentials to a good meal: good cooking and excellent service. It matters not whether you take their 35-cent luncheon or order a most elaborate meal, you will find that the service is just what it ought to be. We asked Brenty what he considered his most famous dish, and like all other proprietors, he shrugged his shoulders and said, with hands emphasizing his words, "We have so many fine dishes." "Of course we know that, but what do you consider the very best?" "There is no one the very best. I could give you two." "Let it be two then," was our immediate rejoinder, and here is what he gave us as the best recipes of the Zanduia. First, let us give you an idea of the difficulty under which we secured these recipes, by printing them just as he wrote them down for us, and then we shall elaborate a little and show the result of skillful questioning. This is the way he wrote the recipe for risotto Milanese. Risotto alla Milanese. Onions chopped fine, marrow and little butter, rice, saffron, chicken broth. When cooked, add fresh butter and Parmesan cheese seasoned. What was embodied in the words "when cook" was the essential of the recipe, and here is the way we got it. Chop one large onion fine. Cut a beef marrow into small dice and stir it with the chopped onion. Put a small piece of butter in a frying pan, and into this put the onion and marrow and fry to a delicate brown. Now add one scant cup of rice, stirring constantly, and into this put a pinch of saffron that has been bruised. When the rice takes on a brown color, add slowly chicken broth as needed until the rice is thoroughly cooked. Then add a lump of fresh butter about the size of a walnut and sprinkle liberally with grated Parmesan cheese, seasoning to taste with pepper and salt. This is to be served with chicken or veal. The second recipe was for fritto misto, and he wrote it as follows. Fritto misto. Lamb chops and brains breaded, sweetbreads, escallop of veal, fresh mushrooms, Italian squash when in season, asparagus or cauliflower fried in fresh butter, dipped in beaten eggs, lime juice. Fritto misto means fried mixture, and the recipe as we finally elucidated it is as follows. Take a lamb chop, a piece of calf brain, one sweetbread, a slice of veal, a fresh mushroom, sliced Italian squash, a piece of asparagus or of cauliflower, and dip these into a batter made of an egg well beaten with a little flour. Sprinkle these with a little lime juice and fry to a delicate brown in butter, adding salt and pepper to taste. At the Zanduia, as at all other Italian restaurants not much affected by Americans, you will find an atmosphere of unconventionality that is delightful to the Bohemian. There is no irksome espionage on the part of other patrons, all of whom are there for the purpose of attending strictly to their own business, and the affairs of other diners are of no consequence to them. There is freedom of expression and unconsciousness, most pleasing after having experienced those other restaurants where it seems to be the business of all the rest of the guests to know just what you are eating and drinking. There is little of the obnoxious posing that one finds in restaurants of the downtown districts, for while Italians, in common with all other Latins, are natural-born posers, they are not offensive in it, but rather impress you with the same feeling as the antics of a child. One of the little out-of-the-way restaurants of the Italian Quarter is the Leon d'Oro at 1525 Grant Avenue, and it is one of the surprises of that district. Lazzarini, he with the big voice, presides over the tiny kitchen in the rear of the room devoted to public service and family affairs. Soft-voiced Rita, with her demure air and her resemblance to Evangeline, with her crossed apron strings and delicate features, takes your order, and soon comes the booming sound from the neighborhood of the range that announces to all patrons, as well as to some who may be in the vicinity on the street, that your order is ready, and then everybody knows what you are eating. As you sit, either in curtained alcove or at the common table in the main room, little Andrea will visit you with his cat. Both are institutions of the place, and one is prone to wonder how a cat can have so much patience with a little boy. Andrea speaks Italian so fluently and so rapidly that it gives you the impression of a quick rushing stream of pure water, tumbling over the stones of a deep declivity. He is not yet old enough to understand that it is not everybody who knows how to speak Italian, but that makes not the slightest difference with him, for he talks without ever expecting an answer. Lazzarini understands the art and science of cooking, and some of the dishes he prepares are so unusual that one goes again and again to partake of them. Possibly his best dish is the following: chicken à la Lion d'Oro. Cut a spring chicken into pieces. Place these in a pan containing hot olive oil and season with salt and pepper. Turn the chicken until it is thoroughly browned and add finely chopped green peppers. Let it cook a while, then add a finely chopped clove of garlic and a little sage. Put in a small glass of Marsala wine, tomato sauce, and French mushrooms and let it simmer for 10 minutes. Before taking from the pan, add half a tablespoonful of butter and serve on a hot plate. Lazzarini also makes a specialty of snails, and they are well worth trying while you are experimenting with the unusual things to eat. The recipe for these is as follows: snails à la Bordelaise. Put 10 pounds of snails in a covered barrel and keep for 10 days. Then put in a tub with a handful of salt and 1/4 gallon of vinegar. Stir for 20 minutes until a foam rises, then take out and wash thoroughly until the water runs clear. Put in a large pot a pint of virgin olive oil, 4 large onions and 8 cloves of garlic, all chopped fine, and a small bunch of parsley, chopped fine. Put the pot over the fire, and when the onions are browned, stir in some white wine or Marsala, and then put in the snails. Cover and let simmer for 35 minutes. While cooking, add a pint of meat stock, a little butter, and some aniseed. When done, put in a soup tureen and serve. To remove the snails, use small wooden toothpicks. A Breath of the Orient. San Francisco's world-famed Chinatown, like the rest of the city, is changed since the Big Fire, and the Chinatown of today is but a reminiscence of the old Oriental city that was set in the midst of the most thriving Occidental metropolis, the city that was. There has never been much of Chinatown that savored of Bohemianism, but it has always been the vogue for visitors to make a trip through its mysterious alleys, peering into the fearsome dark doorways, listening to the ominous slamming doors of the clubs, and shuddering in a delightful horror at the recumbent opium smokers pointed out to them by the industrious guide. And when they were taken into one of the gambling houses and shown the double doors, and the many contrivances used to prevent police interference with the innocent games of fan-tan, and then were shown the secret underground passage leading from one of the gambling houses to the stage of the Great Chinese Theater, 2 blocks away, they went home ready to believe anything told them about the ways that are dark and tricks that are vain, for they were sure the heathen Chinese was peculiar. Chinese restaurant life never appealed to Bohemians, and when it became necessary to entertain visitors with the trip to a Chinatown restaurant, the ordinary service was of tea and rice cakes, served from lacquered trays in gaudy rooms, and the admiring visitors could well imagine themselves in far-off cafe. Then came the fire, and Chinatown, with the rest of the downtown portion of San Francisco, passed away. In the rebuilding, the owners of the properties concluded to give the quarter a more Chinese aspect, and pagoda-like structures are now to be found in all parts of the section. The curiosity of the tourist is an available asset to Chinatown, and with queer houses and queer articles on sale, there is always plenty of uninitiated to keep the guides busy. But from a city of more than 25,000 Orientals in the midst of an enlightened city, an Asiatic city that had its own laws and executed its criminals with the most utter disregard for American laws, it has changed into one of the most law-abiding parts of the great city. With the passing of the queue came the adoption of the American style of dressing, and much of the picturesqueness of the old Chinatown has disappeared. But with the changed conditions there has come a change in the restaurant life of the quarter, and now a number of places have been opened to cater to Americans, and on every hand one sees chop suey signs and Chinese noodles. It goes without saying that one seldom sees a Chinaman eating in the restaurants that are most attractive to Americans. Some serve both white and yellow, and others serve but the Chinese and a few favored white friends. Probably the best restaurant in Chinatown is that of the Hang Far Low Company at 723 Grant Avenue. Here is served such a variety of strange dishes that one has to be a brave Bohemian indeed to partake without question. Ordinarily when Chinese restaurants are mentioned, but two dishes are thought of, chop suey and chow mein. But neither is considered among the fine dishes served to Chinese epicures. It is much as if one of our best restaurants were to advertise hash as its specialty. Both these dishes might be termed glorified hash. The ingredients are so numerous and so varied with occasion that one is tempted to imagine them made of the table leavings, and that is not at all pleasant to contemplate. We asked one of the managers at the Hang Far Low what he would order if he wished to get the best dish prepared in the restaurant, and he was even more emphatic in his shrugs than the French or Italian managers. He protested that there were so many good things it was impossible to name just one as being the best. You see, we have fish fins. They are very good. Snails, China style, very good too. Then we have turtle, brought from China, different from the turtle they have here, and we cook it China style. Eels come from China, and they are cooked China style too. What is China style? That I cannot tell you, for the cook knows and nobody else. When we cook China style, everything is more better. We have here the very best tea. This may be taken as a sample of what to expect when visiting Chinatown's restaurants, and while we confess to having some excellent dishes served us in Chinatown, our preference lies in other paths of endeavor. We suppose it is all in the point of view, and our point of view is that there is nothing except superficiality in the ordinary Chinese restaurants frequented by Americans, and those not so frequented are impossible because of the average Chinaman's disregard for dirt and the usual niceties of food preparation. End of section 7. LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan. Bohemian San Francisco, The Elegant Art of Dining by Clarence Edwords. Section 8. Artistic Japan. We wish it were in our power to describe a certain dinner as served us in a Japanese restaurant in the days that followed the Great Fire. Desiring to observe in fitting manner a birthday anniversary, we asked a Japanese friend if he could secure admission for a little party at a restaurant noted for serving none but the highest class Japanese. We did not even know where the restaurant was, but had heard of such a place, and when we received word that we would be permitted to have a dinner there, we invited a newspaper friend who was in the city from New York, together with 2 other friends, and the Japanese, who was the editor of the Soko Shimbun. He took us to a dwelling house in O'Farrell Street, having given previous notice of our coming. There was nothing on the outside to indicate that it was anything but a residence, but when we were ushered into the large front room we found it beautifully decorated with immense chrysanthemums, and glittering with silver and cut glass on a magnificently arranged table. In deference to the fact that all but our Japanese friend were unaccustomed to chopsticks, forks were placed on the table as well as the little sticks that the Orientals use so deftly. At each place was a beautiful lacquer tray, about 12 by 18 inches, a pair of chopsticks, a fork, and a teaspoon. Before the meal was over, several of us became quite expert in using the chopsticks. When we were seated, in came two little Japanese women in full native costume bearing a service of tea. The cups and saucers were of a most delicate blue and white ware, with teapot to match. Our first cup was taken standing, in deference to a Japanese custom where all drank to the host. Then followed sake in little artistic bottles and sake cups that hold not much more than a double tablespoonful. Sake is the Japanese wine made of rice, and is taken in liberal quantities. At each serving, someone drank to someone else, then a return of the compliment was necessary. Having always heard that Orientals turned menus topsy-turvy, we were not at all surprised when the little serving women brought to each of us 2 silver plates and set them on our trays. These plates contained what appeared to be cake, one seeming to be angel food with icing, and the other fruit cake with the same covering. With these came bowls of soup, served in lacquerware, made of glutinous nests of swallows, and also a salad made of shark fins. We ate the soup and salad and found it good, and then made tentative investigation of the cake. To our great surprise, we discovered the angel food to be fish, and the icing was shredded and pressed lobster. The fruit cake developed into pressed dark meat of chicken, with an icing of pressed and glazed white meat of the same fowl. Following this came the second service of tea, this time in cups of a rare yellow color and beautiful design, with similar teapot. The next course was a mixture of immature vegetables, served in a sort of sauté. These were sprouting beans, lentils, peas, and a number of others with which we were unfamiliar. The whole was delicately flavored with a peculiar sauce. After a short wait, during which the sake bottle circulated freely, one of the women came in bearing aloft a large silver tray on which reposed a mammoth crayfish, or California lobster. This appeared to be covered with shredded coconut, and when it was placed before the host for serving, he was at a loss, for no previous experience told him what to do. It developed that the shredded mass on top was the meat of the lobster, which had been removed, leaving the shellfish in perfect form. It was served cold with a peculiar sauce. Now followed the piece de resistance. A tub of water was brought in, and in this was swimming a live fish, apparently of the carp family. After being on view for a few minutes, it was removed, and soon the handmaidens appeared with thinly sliced raw fish, served with soy sauce. Ordinarily one can imagine nothing more repulsive than a dish of raw fish, but we were tempted and did eat, and found it most delicious, delicate, and with the flavor of raw oysters. Next came the third service of tea, this time in a deep red ware. Then came a dessert of unusual flavor and appearance, followed by preserved ginger and fruit. It must be remembered that during the meal, which lasted from 7 until past midnight, sake was served constantly, yet no one felt its influence in more than a sense of increased exhilaration. It is customary to let the emptied bottles remain on the table until the close of the meal, and there was a mighty showing. It was impossible to eat all that was set before us, but Japanese custom forbids such a breach of etiquette as an indication that the food was not perfection. Consequently, the serving maids appeared bearing 6 carved teak boxes, and placed one at each plate. Into these we arranged the food that was unconsumed, and when we went away we carried it with us. To cap the climax, the Japanese stripped the room of its bounteous decoration of chrysanthemums, and piled them into our arms, and we went home loaded with food and flowers. Proprietor and all his household accompanied us to the door with many bows and gesticulations, wishing us best of luck, and we went back to our homes in the desolated city with the feeling of having been transported to fairyland of the Orient. We discovered later that our Japanese friend was of the family of the Emperor, and was here on a diplomatic mission. Old and New Palace. One cannot well write a book on Bohemian restaurants of San Francisco without saying something about the great hotel, whose history is so intimately intertwined with that of the city since 1873, when William C. Ralston determined that the city by the Golden Gate should have a hotel commensurate with its importance. San Francisco and the Palace Hotel were almost synonymous all over the world, and it was conceded by travelers that nowhere else was there a hostelry to equal this great hotel. To the bon vivant, the grills of the Palace Hotel contained more to enhance the joy of living than anywhere else, and here the chefs prided themselves with providing the best in the land, prepared in such perfect ways as to make a meal at the palace the perfection of gastronomic art. There are 3 distinct eras to the history of the Palace Hotel, the first being from 1876 to 1890, the second from 1890 to 1906, and the third from 1906 to the present day. In the earlier days the grills, both that for gentlemen and that for ladies, were noted for their magnificent service and their wonderful cooking. A breakfast in the ladies' grill with an omelet of California oysters, toast, and coffee was a meal long to be remembered. Possibly the most famous dish of the old palace was this one of omelet with California oysters, and it was prepared in the following manner. Oyster omelet for 2. Take 6 eggs, 100 California oysters, 1 small onion, 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of flour, salt and pepper to taste. Beat the eggs to a froth and stir in the onion chopped fine. Put the eggs into an omelet pan over a slow fire. Mix the flour and butter to a soft paste with a little cream, and stir in with the oysters, adding salt and pepper to taste. When the eggs begin to stiffen, pour the oysters over and turn the omelet together. Serve on a hot plate with a dash of paprika. This is the recipe of Ernest Arbogast, the chef for many years of the Old Palace. The slightly coppery taste of the California oysters gives a piquancy to the flavor of the omelet that can be obtained in no other way, and those who once ate of Arbogast's California oyster omelet invariably called for it again and again. We asked Jules Dauvier, present chef of the palace, for the recipe of what he considered the best dish now prepared at the palace, and he said he would give us 2, as it was difficult to decide which was the best and most distinctive. These are the recipes as he wrote them for us. Planked filet mignon. Trim some select filet mignon of beef, about 4 ounces of each, nicely. Sauté these in a frying pan with clarified butter on a hot fire. Dress on a small round plank, about 4½ inches in diameter, decorated with a border of mashed potatoes. Over the filet mignon pour stuffed pimentos covered with a sauce made of fresh mushrooms, sautéed, over which has been poured a little Chateaubriand sauce. Serve Chateaubriand sauce in a bowl. The second is cold fillet of sand dabs, Palace. Select 6 nice fresh sand dabs. Raise the fillets from the bone, skin, and pare nicely, and season with salt and paprika. Arrange them in an earthenware dish. Cut in julienne 1 stalk of celery, 1 green pepper, 1 cucumber, 2 or 3 tomatoes, depending on their size. With the bone of the sand dab well cleaned, make a stock with 1 bottle of Riesling, juice of 1 lemon, and seasoning. Add chervil and tarragon. Season to taste and cook the julienne ingredients with some of the stock. When the rest of the stock is boiling, poach it in the fillets of sand dab, then remove from the fire and let get cold. Put the garnishing around the fillets and put on ice to get in jelly. When ready to serve, decorate around the dish with any kind of salad you like, and with beets, capers, olives, and marinated mushrooms. This must be served very cold, and you may serve mayonnaise sauce on the side. We asked Dauvier what he considered his most delicate salad, and he gave us this recipe. Palace Grill Salad. Select 3 hearts of celery and cut them julienne. Cut some pineapple and pimentos into dice. Mix all well together in a bowl and add mayonnaise sauce and a little whipped cream. Sprinkle some finely chopped green peppers on top and serve very cold. End of section 8.
Section 9 of Bohemian San Francisco. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Bohemian San Francisco, The Art of Elegant Dining by Clarence Edwords. Section 9. At the Hotel St. Francis. On the morning of April 18th, 1906, one of us stood in the doorway of the Hotel St. Francis and watched approaching fires that came from 3 directions. It was but a few hours later, when all that part of the city was a mass of seething flames, and in the ruins that lay in the wake of devastation was this magnificent hostelry. Before business in the downtown district was reorganized, and while the work of removing the tangled masses of debris was still in progress, the Merchants' Association of San Francisco called its members together in its annual banquet, and this banquet was held in the basement of the Hotel St. Francis, the crumbling walls and charred and blackened timbers hidden under a mass of bunting and foliage and flowers. Here was emphasized the spirit of Bohemian San Francisco, and it was one of the most merry and enjoyable of feasts ever held in the city. It was made possible by the fact that the management of the Hotel St. Francis was undaunted in the face of almost overwhelming disaster. The same spirit has carried the hotel through stress of storm, and it stands now almost as a monument to the energy of James Woods, its manager. There has always been a soft spot in our hearts for the Hotel St. Francis, and it is here that we have always felt a most pleasurable emotion when seeking a place where good things are served. Whether it be in the magnificent white and gold dining room, or the old tapestry room that has been remodeled into a dining room, or in the electric grill below stairs, it has always been the same. We asked Chef Victor Hertzler what he considered his best recipe, and his answer was characteristic of him. "I shall give you sole Edward VII. If this is not satisfactory, I can give you a meat, or a salad or a soup recipe." We considered it satisfactory, and here it is. Sole Edward VII. Cut the fillets out of one sole and lay them flat on a buttered pan, and season with salt and pepper. Make the following mixture and spread over each sole. Take 1/2 pound of sweet butter, 3 ounces of chopped salted almonds, 1/4 pound of chopped fresh mushrooms, a little chopped parsley, the juice of a lemon, salt, pepper, and a little grated nutmeg. Add to the pan 1/2 glassful of white wine, and put in the oven for 20 minutes. When done, serve in the pan by placing it on a platter with a napkin under it. Hertzler has another recipe which he prizes greatly, and which he calls Celery Victor, and this is the recipe which he gave us. Celery Victor. Take 6 stalks of celery, well washed. Make a stock of 1 soup hen or chicken bones, and 5 pounds of veal bones in the usual manner, with carrots, onions, parsley, bay leaves, salt, and pepper. Place the celery in a vessel, and strain the broth over it. Boil until soft and let cool off in its own broth. When cold, press the broth out of the celery with the hand, gently, and place on a plate. Season with salt, fresh ground black pepper, chervil, and 1/4 white wine vinegar with tarragon to 3/4 of best olive oil. Amid bright lights. Streets centering around Powell, from Market up to Geary, may well be termed the Great White Way of San Francisco, if New York will permit the plagiarism. Here are congregated the most noted of the lively restaurants of the present day San Francisco. Here the streets are ablaze with light at night, and thronged with people, for here is the restaurant and theater district proper of the city. Among the restaurants deserving of special mention in this district are the two Solaris. When Solari opened his restaurant at 354 Geary Street, where he continues to attract good livers by the excellence of his cooking, he at once achieved fame which has never waned. It so happened that there were two brothers, and, as sometimes occurs, brothers disagreed, with the result that Fred Solari withdrew and opened a restaurant at Geary and Mason, just a short distance from the original place. Evidently, the recipe for what is considered best in both of the Solari restaurants came from common ownership, for each of these places gave in response to a request for its best recipe the following: chicken country style. Cut a chicken in 8 pieces and drop them into some cold milk, seasoning with salt. After soaking for a few minutes, dry the chicken in flour and lay in a frying pan in good butter. Place in the oven and let them cook slowly, turning them occasionally until they are nice and brown on all sides, when remove them. In the gravy put a tumblerful of cream and a pinch of paprika. Mix well and let it cook for 10 minutes until it gets thick. Then strain and pour over the chicken and serve. The following don'ts are added to the recipe. Don't use frozen poultry. Don't substitute cornstarch and milk for cream. End of Section 9 from Bohemian San Francisco, The Art of Elegant Dining, read by Denny in Modesto, California, for LibriVox, Fall 2006.
LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kirsten Ferreri, Los Angeles, California, September of 2006. Bohemian San Francisco, The Elegant Art of Dining, by Clarence Edwords. Section 10. Around Little Italy. San Francisco holds no more interesting district than that lying around the base of Telegraph Hill, and extending over towards North Beach even as far as Fisherman's Wharf. Here is the part of San Francisco that first felt the Restoration impulse, and this was the first part of San Francisco rebuilt after the Great Fire, and in its rebuilding it recovered all of its former characteristics, which is more than can be said of any other part of the rebuilt city. Here, extending north from Jackson Street to the Bay, are congregated Italians, French, Portuguese, and Mexicans, each in a distinct colony, and each maintaining the life, manners, and customs, and in some instances the costumes, of their parent countries, as fully as if they were in their native lands. Here are stores, markets, fish and vegetable stalls, bakeries, pasta factories, sausage factories, cheese factories, wine presses, tortilla bakeries, hotels, pensions, and restaurants, each distinctive, and full of foreign life and animation, and each breathing an atmosphere characteristic of the country from which the parent stock came. Walk along the streets on the side of Telegraph Hill, and one can well imagine himself transported to a sunny hillside in Italy, for here he hears no other language than that which came from the shores of the Mediterranean. Here are Italians of all ages, sexes, and conditions of servitude, from the padrone to the bootblack who works for a pittance until he obtains enough to start himself in business. If one investigate closely, it will be found that many of the people of this part of San Francisco have been here for years, and still understand no other language than that of their native home. Why should they learn anything else, they say? Everybody around them, and with whom they come into contact, speaks Italian. Here are the Corsicans, with their peculiar ideas of the vendetta and the cheapness of life in general, and the Sicilians and Genoese and Milanese. Here are some from the slopes of Vesuvius or Etna, with inborn knowledge of the grape and wine-making. All have brought with them recipes and traditions, some dating back for hundreds of years, or even thousands, to the days before the Christian era was born. It is just the same to them as it was across the ocean, for they hear the same dialect and have the same customs. Do they desire any special delicacy from their home district, they need but to go to the nearest Italian grocery store and get it, for these stores are supplied direct from Genoa or Naples. This is the reason that many of the older men and women still speak the soft dialect of their native communities, and if you are so unfortunate as not to be able to understand them, then it is you who are the loser. Do you wish to know something about the conditions in Mexico? Would you like to learn what Mexicans themselves really think about affairs down in that disturbed republic? Go along Broadway west of Grant Avenue, and then around the corner on Stockton, and you will see strange signs, and perhaps you will not know that fonda means restaurant, or that tienda means store. But these are the signs you will see, and when you go inside you will hear nothing but the gentle Spanish of the Mexican, so toned down and so changed that some of the Castilians profess to be unable to understand it. Here you will find all the articles of household use that are to be found in the heart of Mexico, and that have been used for hundreds of years, despite the progress of civilization in other countries. You will find all the strange foods, and all the inconsequentials that go to make the sum of Mexican happiness, and if you can get sufficiently close in the acquaintance, you will find that not only will they talk freely to you, but they will tell you things about Mexico that not even the heads of the departments in Washington are aware of. Perhaps you would like to know something about the bourgeois French, those who have come from the peasant district of the mother country. Go a little further up Broadway, and you will begin to see the signs changing from Spanish to French, and if you can understand them, you will know that here you will be given a dinner for 25 cents on weekdays and for 35 cents on Sundays. The difference is brought about by the difference between the price of cheap beef or mutton and the dearer chicken. Up in the second story on a large building you may see a sign that tells you meals will be served and rooms provided. One of these is the rendezvous of the anarchists, who gather every evening and discuss the affairs of the world and how to regulate them. But they are harmless anarchists in San Francisco, for here they have no wrongs to redress, so they sit and drink their forbidden absinthe and dream their dreams of fire and sword while they talk in whispers of what they are going to do to the crowned heads of Europe. It is their dream, and we have no quarrel with it or them. But for real interest, one must get back to the slope of Telegraph Hill, to the streets running up from Columbus Avenue, until they are so steep that only goats and babies can play on them with safety. At least, we suppose the babies are as active as the goats, for the side of the hill is alive with them. Let us walk first along Grant Avenue, and do a little window shopping. Just before you turn off Broadway into Grant Avenue, after passing the Fior d'Italia, the Buon Gusto, the Dante, and Il Trovatore restaurants, we come to a most interesting window where is displayed such a variety of sausages as to make one wonder at the inventive genius who thought of them all. As you wonder, you peep timidly in the door, and then walk in from sheer amazement. You now find yourself surrounded with sausages from floor to ceiling, and from side wall to side wall on both ceiling and floor, and such sausage it is! From strings so thin as to appear about the size of a lady's little finger, to individual sausages as large as the thigh of a giant, they hang in festoons, crawl over beams, lie along shelves, decorate counters, peep from boxes on the floor, and invite you to taste them in the slices that lay on the butcher's block. One can well imagine being in a cave of flesh, yet if you look closely, you will discover that sausage is but a part of the strange edible things to be had here. Here are cheeses in wonderful variety, cheeses from Italy that are made from goat's milk, ass's milk, cow's milk, and mare's milk, cheeses from Spain, Mexico, Germany, Switzerland, and all the other countries where they make cheese, even including the United States. These cheeses are of all shapes and all sizes, from the great round flat cheese that we are accustomed to see in country grocery stores to the queer-shaped caciocavallo, which looks like an Indian club, and is eaten with fruit. There are dried vegetables and dried fruits, such as were never dreamed of in your limited experience, and even the grocer himself, the smiling and cosmopolitan Verga, confesses that he does not know the names of all of them. As you go out into the street you blink at the transformation, for you have been thousands of miles away. You think that surely there can be nothing more. Wait a bit, turn the corner and walk along Grant Avenue toward the hill. See, here is a window full of bread. Look closely at it, and you will notice that it is not like the bread you are accustomed to. Count the different kinds, 14 of them in all, from the long sticks of grissini to the great slid loaves weighing many pounds. Light bread, heavy bread, good bread, soft bread, hard bread, delicate bread, each having its special use, and all satisfying to different appetites. Now go a little further to the corner, cross the street, and enter the store of the Costa brothers. It is a big grocery store, and while you will not find the sausage and mystifying mass of food products in such lavish display and profuseness as in the previous place, if you look around you will find this even more interesting, for it is on a different plane. Here you find the delicacies and the niceties of Italian living. At first glance it looks as if you were any one of the American grocery stores of downtown, but a closer examination reveals the fact that these canned goods and these boxes and jars hold peculiar foods that you are unaccustomed to. Perhaps you will find a clerk who can speak good English, but if you cannot, either of the Costa brothers will be glad to show you the courtesy of answering your questions. Turn around and look at the shelves filled with bottles of wine. Now you feel that you are on safe ground, for you know about wines, and can talk about Cresta Blanca, and Montrouge, and Asti Colony Tipo Chianti. But wait a minute, here are labels you do not understand, and wines that you never even heard of. Here are wines whose taste is so delicious that you wonder why it is the whole world is not talking about it and drinking it. Here are wines from the slopes of Etna, sparkling and sweet. Here are wines from grapes grown on the warm slopes of Vesuvius, and brought to early perfection by the underground fires. Here are wines from the colder slopes of mountains, wine from Parma and from Sicily and Palermo, where the warm Italian sunshine has been the arch-chemist to bring to perfection the fruit of the vine. Here are still wines and those that sparkle. Here the famed Lacrima Christi, both Spumante and Fresco, said to be the finest wine made in all Italy, and the Spumante have the unusual quality, for an Italian wine, of being dry. But to tell you of all the interesting articles to be found in these Italian and French and Mexican stores would be impossible, for some of them have not been translated into English, and even the storekeepers would be at a loss for words to explain them. This is all a part of the Bohemianism of San Francisco, and that is why we are telling you about it in a book that is supposed to be devoted to Bohemian restaurants. The fact is that San Francisco's Bohemian restaurants would be far less interesting were it not for the fact that they can secure the delicacies imported by these foreign storekeepers to supply the wants of their people. But do not think you have exhausted the wonders of Little Italy when you have left the stores, for there is still more to see. If you were ever in Palermo and went into the little side streets, you saw the strings of macaroni, spaghetti, and other pastas drying in the sun, while children and dogs played through and around it, giving you such a distaste for it that you have not eaten any Italian pasta since. But in San Francisco they do things differently. There are a number of pasta factories, all good and clean. Take that of P. Fiorini, for instance, at a point a short distance above Costa Brothers. You cannot miss it, for it has a picture of Fiorini himself as a sign, and on it he tells you that if you eat his pasta you will get to be as fat as he is. Go inside and you will find that Fiorini can talk just enough English to make himself understood, while his good wife, his sole assistant, can neither speak nor understand any but her native Italian. But that does not bother her in the least, for she can make signs, and you can understand them even better than you understand the English of her husband. Here you will see the making of raviolis by the hundred at a time, tagliarini, tortellini, macaroni, spaghetti, capellini, percatelli, tagliatelle, and all the 72 other varieties. The number of kinds of pasta is most astonishing, and one wonders why there are so many kinds and what is done with them. Fiorini will tell you. Each kind has its distinctive use. Some are for soups, some for sauces, and all for special edibility. There are hundreds of recipes for cooking the various pastas, and each one is said to be a little better than the others, if you can imagine such a thing. Turn another corner after leaving Fiorini's, and look down into a basement. You do not have to go to the country to see wine-making. Here is one of the primitive wine presses of Italy, and if you want to know why some irreverent people call the red wine of the Italians Chateau Lafite, you will have but to watch the process of its making in these Telegraph Hill wine houses. The grapes are poured into a big tub, and a burly man takes off his shoes and socks and emulates the oxen of biblical times when it treaded out the grain. Of course he washes his feet before he gets into the wine tub, but at that it is not a pleasant thing to contemplate. Now you look around with wider and more comprehensive eyes, and now you begin to understand something about these strange foreign quarters in San Francisco. As you look around you note another thing. Italian fecundity is apparent everywhere, and the further up the steep slope of the hill you go, the more children you see. They are everywhere, and of all sizes and ages, in such reckless profusion that you no longer wonder if the world is to be depopulated through the coming of the fad of eugenics. The Italian mother has but two thoughts, her God and her children, and it is to care for her children that she has brought from her native land the knowledge of cookery, and of those things that help to put life and strength in their bodies. An Italian girl said to us one day, "Mamma knows nothing but cooking and going to church. She cooks from daylight until dark, and stops cooking only when she is at church." It was evident that her domestic and religious duties dominated her life, and she knew but two things, to please her God and to care for her family, and without question, if occasion demanded, the pleasure of her family took precedence. San Francisco's Latin Quarter is appealing, enticing, and hypnotizing. Go there and you will learn why San Francisco is a Bohemian city. You will find out that so many things you have thought important are really not at all worth while. Go there and you will find the root of Bohemian restaurants. These people have studied gastronomy as a science, and they have imparted their knowledge to San Francisco, with the result that the Bohemian spirit enters into our very lives, and our minds are broadened, and our views of life and our ideas have a wider scope. It is because of this condition, born on the slopes of Telegraph Hill, that we are drawn out of depressing influences, out of the spirit of self-consciousness, and find a world of pleasure, innocent and educational, the inspiration for which has been handed down through generations of Latina since the days of early Roman Empire, which inspiration is still a power for good, because it takes people out of themselves, and places them where they can look with understanding and speak the language of perception. Little Italy's charm has long been recognized by artists and writers, and many of them began their careers which led to fame and fortune in little cheap rooms on Telegraph Hill. Here have lived many whose names are now known to fame, and to name them would be almost like a directory of the world-renowned artists and writers. Here is still the memory of Bret Harte and Mark Twain. Here is where Keith had his early studio. Cadenasso, Martinez, and many others know these slopes and love them. To all these and many more, the Latin Quarter of San Francisco possessed a charm they could find nowhere else, and if one desired to bring a saddened look to the faces of many now living elsewhere, it is but necessary to talk of the good old days when Bohemia was on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco. Here they had their domicile, and here they foregathered in the little restaurants whose claims to merit lay chiefly in the fact that they were rarely visited by other than the Italians of the quarter and these Bohemians who lived there. Here was the inspiration of many a good book, and many a famous picture, whose inception came from thoughts that crystallized amid these surroundings. And here many a needy Bohemian struggled through the lean days with the help of these kind-hearted Latina. Here they, even as we, were taught something of the art of cooking. Of course, if one desire to learn various methods of preparing food, it is necessary to keep both eyes open and to ask many questions, seeking the information that sometimes comes from unlooked-for sources. Even at that, it is not always a good idea to take everything for granted, or to accept every suggestion. For you may meet with the Italian vegetable dealer, who is so eager to please his customers that he pretends a knowledge he does not possess. We discovered him one day when he had on display a vegetable that was strange to us. "How do you cook it?" was our question. "Fry it." Then his partner shouted his laughter and derision. "Oh, he's one fine cook. All the time he say fry it. One day a lady she come into the store and she sees the big bucket of ripe olives. The lady she come from the East and she never seen olives like that before. How do you cook it, say the lady. Fry it, says my partner. Everything he say fry it. In another vegetable stand we found an Italian girl whose soft lisping accent pronounced her a Genoese, and she diffidently suggested a fine Italian dessert. A fine dessert. You take macaroons and strawberries. Put a layer of macaroons in a dish, and then a layer of strawberries. Cover these with sugar, and then another layer of macaroons and strawberries and sugar until you have all you want. Over these pour some rum, and set fire to it. After it is burned out, you have a fine dessert. We bought the macaroons and strawberries on the way home, and did not even wait for dinner time to try it. We pronounce it good. It was made the right way, and we advise you to try it, for it is simple, and it leaves a most delicious memory. End of section 10.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to learn how to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Bohemian San Francisco. The Elegant Art of Dining. Section 11. Where Fish Come In and Fish and Their Variety. Where fish come in. It was very early one morning, so early that one of us strenuously pretended sleep, while the other gave urgent reminder that this was the day we were to go to Fisherman's Wharf. Daylight came early, and it was just 4 o'clock when we began preparations. A cup of hot coffee while dressing served to get us wide awake, and we were off to see the fish come in. Fisherman's Wharf lies over at North Beach, at the end of Meigg's Wharf, where the customs officers have their station, and to reach it one takes either the Powell and North Beach cars, or the Kearny and North Beach cars, and at the end of either walks 2 blocks. When you get that far, anybody you see can tell you where to go. Fog mist was stealing along the Marin shore and hiding Golden Gate when we arrived, and the rays of the sun took some time to make a clear path out to sea. Out of the bank of white came gliding the heavy power boats of the Sicilian and Corsican fishermen, while from offshore were the lateen-rigged boats of those who had been fishing up the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, their yards aslant to catch the faint morning breeze. As they slipped through the leaden water to their mooring at the wharf, we could see the decks and holds piled with fish and crabs. Roosting on piles, and lining the water's edge on everything that served to give foothold, were countless seagulls, all waiting for the breakfast they knew was coming from the discarded fish, and fit companions were the women with shawls over their heads, irreverently called mud hens, and old men in dilapidated clothing who sat along the stringers of the wharf, some with baskets, some with buckets, and others with little paper bags in which to put the fish which they could get so cheaply it meant a meal for them when otherwise they would have to go without. The earlier boats were moored, and on the decks fires were burning in charcoal braziers, on which the fishermen cooked their breakfasts of fish and coffee, with the heavy black loaves of bread for which they seemed to have special fancy. As the odor of the cooking fish came up from the water, the waiting gulls and men and women moved a little closer. Breakfast over, the fishermen turned to the expectant crowd and began taking notice of the pitiful offerings of coin. 10 buckets, newspapers, bags, rags, and even scooped hands were held down, each containing such coin as the owner possessed, and in return came bountiful supply of fish. A fine fat crab, for which your market man would charge you 40 cents, was sold for 10. Beautiful, fresh sand dabs, but an hour or two out of the water, were 5 cents a pound, while sea bass, fresh cod, mackerel, and similar fish went at the same price. Small fish, or white bait, went by quantity, 10 cents securing about half a gallon. Smelt, herring, flounder, sole, all went at equally low prices, and as each buyer secured his allotment, he went hurrying off through the mist, as silently as the floating gulls. While these were all supplied, the rest of the fish and crabs were taken up to the wharf and put on the counters of the free market, where they were sold at prices most tempting. Shrimps, alive and active, crayfish, clams, squid, and similar seafood was in profusion and sold at prices on a parity with that of the fish. As the day wore on, the early buyers were replaced by those who knew of the free fish market and came to get good supplies for their money. Here were boarding-house keepers, unmistakable anywhere, Bohemians in hard luck who remembered that they could get good fish here at a minimum of price, and came now while on the downturn of the wheel. As a human interest study, it was better than a study of fish. Fisherman's Wharf is where the independent fishermen bring their catches to San Francisco, but it is not where the city's great supply comes in. To see that, we had to go along the docks until we came to the Broadway wharf, where Palladini, the head of the Fish Trust, unloads his tugs of their tons and tons of fish. It is not nearly so interesting to look at, but it gives a good idea of what comes out of the sea every day to supply the needs of San Francisco and the surrounding country. These tugs bring in the catches of dozens of smaller boats, manned by fishermen who are toiling out beyond the heads, and up the two great rivers. From far out around the Farallones, from up around the potato patch with its mournful fog bell constantly tolling, from down the coast as far as Monterey Bay, where fish are in such abundance that it is said that they have to give a signal when they want to turn around. From up the rivers come fish to the man who has grown from the owner of a small sailboat to be the power that controls prices of all the fish that go to the markets of the city. By the time we finished with Palladini's fish, we felt ready for breakfast, and took a car down to Davis and Pacific, where we found basuros serving breakfast to dozens of market gardeners who had finished their uploading, and there, while partaking of the fresh fish we had brought from Fisherman's Wharf, we saw another phase of San Francisco's early morning life. Here were gardeners who came in the darkness of early morning to supply hucksters, small traders, and a few thrifty people who knew of the cheapness, and in Colombo Market they drove their great wagons and discharged their day's gathering of vegetables of all kinds. But a few steps away is the great fruit market of the early morning, and here tons of the finest fruits are distributed to the hundreds of wagons that crowd the street to such an extent that it takes all the ingenuity of experienced policemen to keep clear way for traffic. Threading their way in and out between the wheels and the heels of horses were men and women all looking for bargains in food. Amid a din almost deafening, business was transacted with such celerity that in 3 hours the streets were cleared, fruits and vegetables sold and on their way to distant stands, and the tired policemen leaning against friendly walls, recuperating after the strenuous work of keeping order in chaos. It is when one goes to these places in the morning and sees the cheapness of these foods that we can understand in a small way why it is that so many Italian restaurants can give such good meals for so little money. One wonders at a table d'hôte dinner of 6 or 7 courses for 25 cents, or even for half a dollar, and one accustomed to buying meats, fish, vegetables, and fruits at the exorbitant prices charged at most of the markets and fruit and vegetable stands, now sees why the thrifty foreigner can make and save money, while the average American can hardly keep more than 2 jumps ahead of the sheriff. Fish and their variety. Probably the most frequent question asked us by those who come to San Francisco is, where can we get the best fish? With San Francisco's wonderful natural advantages as a fish market, one is sometimes surprised that more attention is not given to preparing fish as a specialty. But one restaurant in the city deals exclusively with seafood, and even there one is astonished at an overlooked opportunity. Darby and Immel have catered to San Francisco in oysters for many years, and after the fire they opened the Shellfish Grotto in O'Farrell Street, between Powell and Mason Streets. And this is one of the very few distinctive fish restaurants in the country. It is when one considers the possibilities that a shock comes from the environing decorations. White and gold pillars with twining ivy reaching to the old gold and rose mural and ceiling embellishments seem out of place in a restaurant that is devoted entirely to catering to lovers of fish. Nothing in the place indicates its character, except the big lobster in front of the building. Not even so much as a picture to bring a sentiment of the ocean to the mind. We are going to take a liberty, although possibly Darby and Immel may call it an impertinence, and give them a bit of advice. It costs them nothing, consequently they can act on it or not, and it will make no difference. This is our suggestion. Change the interior of the place entirely, by having around the walls a series of large glass aquaria, with as many different kinds of fish swimming about as it is possible to get, something on the order of the interior of the aquarium in Battery Park in New York. Paint the ceiling to represent the surface of the water, as seen from below. Have seaweed and kelp in place of ivy, and a fish net or two caught up in the corners of the room, with here and there a starfish or a crab, not too many, for profuseness in this sort of decoration is an abomination. Then you will have a restaurant that will be talked about wherever people sit at meat. But to get back to our talk about fish, and where to get it prepared and cooked the best. We must say that the finest fish we have eaten in San Francisco was not in the high-priced restaurants at all, but in a little dingy back room, down at Fisherman's Wharf, where there was sand on the floor, and all the sounds of the kitchen were audible in the dining room. The place was patronized almost solely by the Italian fishermen, who not only know how to catch a fish, but how it ought to be cooked. One may always rest assured that when he gets a fish in one of the Italian restaurants, it is perfectly fresh, for there are 2 things that an Italian demands in eating, and they are fresh fish and fresh vegetables. At the Gianduja at Union and Stockton Streets one is certain to get fish cooked well, and that is perfectly fresh. The variety is not so good as at the Shellfish Grotto, but otherwise it is just as good in every respect. At the grotto there is a wonderful variety, but the quantity is at the minimum, because there, too, they will have no fish that has been 24 hours out of the water. One wonders how a full-course dinner entirely of fish can be prepared, but if you will go to the shellfish grotto, you will find it is done, and done well at that. Here you can get a good dinner for $1, or, if you prefer, they have a fish dinner deluxe, for which they charge $2. Both are good, the latter having additional wines and delicacies. Down in Washington Street, just off Columbus Avenue, is the Vesuvius, an Italian restaurant of low price but excellent cooking. A specialty there is fish, which is always brought fresh from the nearby Clay Street market as ordered. Consequently, it is perfect. When you give your order, a messenger is dispatched to the market, and usually he brings the fish alive, and the chef prepares it in one of his many ways, for he is said to have more secrets about the cooking of fish than one would think it possible for one brain to contain. The trouble about this restaurant is that the rest of the menu does not come up to the fish standard, but if you desire a simple luncheon of fish, there is no better place to get it. There are 3 things in which an Easterner will be disappointed in San Francisco, and these are oysters. Pacific Coast oysters fail in size, flavor, and cooking when compared with the luscious bivalve of the Atlantic, so far as the ordinary forms of preparation are concerned. Even fancy dishes, such as oysters Kirkpatrick, would be better if made of the Eastern oyster. Not what they call the Eastern oyster here, for that is a misnomer, but the oysters that grow in the Atlantic Ocean. Of the Pacific oysters, the best is the Toke Point, that comes from Oregon. They are similar in size to the Blue Point, but lack the flavor. When in a San Francisco restaurant you are asked what sort of oyster you will have, and you see the familiar names on the menu card, remember that these are transplanted oysters, and have lost much of their flavor in the transplanting, or else they are oysters that have been shipped across the continent, and have thereby lost their freshness. The California oyster, proper, is very small, and it has a peculiar coppery taste, which bon vivants declare add to its piquancy. Instead of ordering these by the dozen, you order them by the 100, it being no difficult task to eat 100 at a meal, especially when prepared in a pepper roast. Everyone knows the staple ways of preparing oysters, and every chef looks upon the oyster as the source of new flavors in many dishes, but to our mind the best way we have found in San Francisco was at a little restaurant down in Washington Street before the fire. It was the Bon Gusto, where they served fish and oysters better than anything else, because the owners were the chefs, and they were from the island of Catalan, off the coast of Italy. Their specialty was called oysters à la Catalan, and their recipe, which is given, can be prepared excellently in a chafing dish. Oysters à la Catalan. Take 1 tablespoonful of butter, 2 teaspoonfuls grated Edam or Parmesan cheese, 4 tablespoonfuls ketchup, 1/2 teaspoonful Worcestershire sauce, 2 teaspoonfuls cream, meat of 1 good-sized crab, cut fine, and 2 dozen oysters. Put the cheese and butter into a double boiler, and when melted smooth, add the ketchup and Worcestershire sauce, mix well, and add the cream and then the crab meat. When creamy and boiling hot, drop in the oysters. As soon as the oysters are crinkled, serve on hot buttered toast on hot plates. In the days before the fire, when you went to a restaurant and ordered fish or oysters, the waiter invariably put before you either a plate of crab salad or a dish of shrimps, with which you were supposed to amuse yourself while the meal was being prepared. Shrimps and crabs were then so plentiful that their price was never considered. Under our new conditions, these always appear on the bill when ordered, and if they be not ordered, they do not appear, for they now are made to increase the income. To the uninitiated visitor, the shrimps so served were always something of a mystery, and after a few futile efforts to get at the meat, they generally gave it up as too much work for the little good derived. The old-timer, however, cracked the shrimp's neck, pinched its tail, and out popped a delicious bonne bouche, which added to the joy of the meal, and increased the appetite. But there are many other ways of serving shrimps, and they are also much used to give flavor to certain fish sauces. One of the most delicious ways of preparing shrimp is what is known as shrimp Creole à la Antoine, so named after the famous New Orleans Antoine, by a chef in San Francisco who had regard for the New Orleans caterer. We doubt it can be had anywhere in San Francisco now, unless you are well enough known to have it prepared according to the recipe. This recipe, by the way, is a good one to use in a chafing dish supper. This is the way it was prepared at the Old Pup Restaurant, one of the noted restaurants before the fire and the earthquake changed conditions. Shrimp Creole. Take 3 pints of unshelled shrimps and shell them, 1/2 pint of cream, 2 tablespoonsful of butter, 2 tablespoonful of flour, 2 tablespoonfuls of catsup, 1 wineglass of sherry, paprika, chili powder, and parsley. Brown the flour in the butter, and add the milk until it is thickened. Color with the catsup and season with paprika and chili powder. Stir in the sherry and make a pink cream, which is to be mixed through the shrimps and not cooked. Sprinkle with chopped parsley and serve with squares of toast or crackers. End of Section 11. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California for LibriVox, Summer 2006.
Is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen Day. Bohemian San Francisco, The Elegant Art of Dining by Clarence Edwords. Section 12. Lobsters and lobsters. When is a lobster not a lobster? When it is a crayfish. This question and answer might well go into the primer of information for those who come to San Francisco from the east, for what is called a lobster in San Francisco is not a lobster at all, but a crayfish. The true lobster is not found in the Pacific along the California coast, and so far efforts at transplanting have not been successful. The Pacific crayfish, however, serves every purpose, and while many contend that its meat is not so delicate in flavor as that of its eastern cousin, the Californian will as strenuously insist that it is better. But, of course, something must always be allowed for the patriotism of the Californian. Lobster served cold with mayonnaise or broiled live lobster are most frequently called for, and while they are both excellent, we find so many other ways of preparing this crustacean that we rarely take the common variety of lobster dishes into consideration. Probably nowhere in San Francisco could one get lobster better served than in the old Delmonico restaurant of the days before the fire. A book could be written about this restaurant, and then all would not be told, for all its secrets can never be known. In New York City, they have what they are pleased to call lobster palaces, but there is not a restaurant in that great metropolis that could approach the Delmonico of San Francisco in its splendid service and its cuisine arrangements. Neither could they approach the romance that always surrounded the O'Farrell Street restaurant. It was here that most magnificent dinners were arranged. It was here that extraordinary dishes were concocted by chefs of worldwide fame. It was here that lobster à la Newburgh reached its highest perfection, and this is the recipe that was followed when it was prepared in the Delmonico. Lobster à la Newburgh. 1 pound of lobster meat, 1 teaspoonful of butter, 1/2 pint of cream, yolks of 4 eggs, 1 wineglass of sherry, lobster fat. 3 hours before cooking, pour the sherry over the lobster meat and let it stand until ready to cook. Heat the butter and stir in with the lobster and wine, and then place this in a stewpan or chafing dish, and cook for 8 minutes. Have the yolks of eggs well beaten and add to them the cream and lobster fat. Stir well and then stir in a teaspoonful of flour. Put this in a double boiler and let cook until thick, stirring constantly. When this is cooked, pour it over the lobster and let all cook together for 3 minutes. Serve in a chafing dish with thin slices of dry toast. King of Shellfish. One has to come to San Francisco to partake of the king of shellfish, the mammoth Pacific crab. I say, come to San Francisco advisedly, for while the crab is found all along the coast, it is prepared nowhere so deliciously as in San Francisco. Of course, our friends in Portland will take exception to this, but the fact remains that nowhere except in San Francisco have so many restaurants become famous because of the way they prepare the crab. The Pacific crab is peculiar, and while it has not the gigantic claws such as are to be seen on those in the Parisian and London markets, its meat is much more delicate in flavor, and the dishes of crab prepared by artists of the gastronomic profession in San Francisco are more savory than those found elsewhere. In the pre-fire days, there were many places which paid especial attention to the cooking of the crab, among them being the Cobweb Palace, previously mentioned, and Goby's. Goby ran one of those places which was not in good repute. Consequently, when ladies went there, they were usually veiled and slipped in through an alley, but the enticement of Goby's crab stew is too much for conventionality, and his little private rooms were always full. Goby's passed with the fire, and the little restaurant bearing his name and in charge of his widow in Union Square Avenue has not attained the fame of the old place. It is possible that she knows the secret of preparing crab as it was prepared in the Goby's of before the fire, but his prestige did not descend to her. Almost all of the Italian restaurants will give you crab in many forms, and all of them are good. Many restaurants use crab meat for flavoring other dishes, but of all the recipes for cooking crab we have found none that we consider so good as that of Goby's. It is as follows. Goby's crab stew. Take the meat of 1 large crab, scraping out all the fat from the shell, 1 good-sized onion, 1 tomato, 1 sweet pepper, 1 teaspoonful of butter, 1 teaspoonful of flour, half a glass of sherry, a pinch of rosemary, 1 clove of garlic, paprika, salt, and mignonette pepper. Soak the crab meat in the sherry 2 hours before cooking. Chop fine the onion, sweet pepper, and tomato with the rosemary. Mash the clove of garlic, rubbing thoroughly in a mortar, and on this put the butter and flour, mixing well together, and gradually adding the salt and mignonette pepper, and stir in 2 tablespoonfuls of cream. Heat this in a stewpan, and when simmering, add the sherry and crab meat, and let all cook together with a slow fire for 8 minutes. Serve in a chafing dish with toasted crackers or thin slices of toasted bread. A dash of Worcestershire sauce just before it is taken up adds to the flavor. Lobster in miniature. Crawfish, or écrevisse, has never been very popular in San Francisco, probably because there are so many other delicate crustaceans that are more easily handled. Yet the crawfish grows to perfection in Pacific waters, and importations of them from Portland, Oregon, are becoming quite an industry. So far it has been used mostly for garnishment of other dishes, and it is only recently that the Hofbrau has been making a specialty of them. All of the better-class restaurants, however, will serve them if you order them. The full flavor of the crawfish is best obtained in a bisque, and the best recipe for this by the famous chef Francatelli, who boasts having been the head of the cuisine of Queen Victoria. His recipe is long, and its preparation requires much patience, but the result is such a gastronomic marvel that no one ever regrets the time spent in its accomplishment. This is the recipe for 8 people, and it is well worth trying if you are giving a dinner of importance. Bisque of crawfish. Take 30 crawfish, from which remove the gut containing the gall in the following manner. Take firm hold of the crawfish with the left hand so as to avoid being pinched by its claws. With the thumb and forefinger of the right hand, pinch the extreme end of the central fin of the tail, and, with a sudden jerk, the gut will be withdrawn. Mince or cut into small dice a carrot, an onion, 1 head of celery, and a few parsley roots, and to these add a bay leaf, a sprig of thyme, a little mignonette pepper, and 2 ounces of butter. Put these ingredients into a stewpan and fry them 10 minutes, then throw in the crawfish and pour on them half a bottle of French white wine. Allow this to boil and then add a quart of strong consomme and let all continue boiling for half an hour. Pick out the crawfish and strain the broth through a napkin by pressure into a basin in order to extract all the essence from the vegetables. Pick the shells off 25 of the crawfish tails, trim them neatly, and set them aside until wanted. Reserve some of the spawn, also half of the body shells with which to make the crawfish butter to finish the soup. This butter is made as follows. Place the shells on a baking sheet in the oven to dry. Let the shells cool and then pound them in a mortar with a little lobster coral and 4 ounces of fresh butter, thoroughly bruising the whole together so as to make a fine paste. Put this in a stew pan and set it over a slow fire to simmer for about 5 minutes. Then rub it through a sieve with considerable pressure into a basin containing ice water. As soon as the colored crawfish butter is to become firmly set through the coldness of the water, take it out and put it in a small basin and set it in the refrigerator until wanted. Reverting to the original recipe, take the remainder of the crawfish and add thereto 3 anchovies washed for the purpose and also the crust of French rolls, fried to a light brown color in butter. Pound all these thoroughly together and then put them into a stew pan with the broth that has been reserved in a basin, and having warmed the bisque thus prepared, rub it through a sieve into a fine puree. Put this puree into a soup pot and finish by incorporating therewith the crawfish butter and season with a little cayenne pepper and the juice of half a lemon. Pour the bisque quite hot into the tureen in which have been placed the crawfish tails and send to the table. This is not so difficult as it appears when you are reading it, and if you wish to have something extra fine, take the necessary time and patience and prepare it. End of section 12.